Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we are going to start Unit 1, Comparative Politics, Nature, Significance and Evolution. First of all, introduction about the unit. Among the several fields or subdisciplines into which political science is divided, comparative politics is the only one which carries a methodological instead of a substantive label. The content and boundaries of comparative politics are poorly defined, partly because the field is an ambiguous compound of method and subject areas. As some scholars have argued, comparative politics has a messy center. This is because it focuses on comparison and the comparative method as a method of political inquiry. While all analysis involves some degree of comparison without which an individual phenomena cannot be understood, comparative politics teaches us how to do so. It attempts to instill into this exercise scientific rigor and technique. While comparative government existed as a subdiscipline for a long time, comparative politics is a relatively new field dating from the post Second World War period. It is a field that is difficult to define, has undergone many changes and reached a plateau by the 1980s beyond which it could not move. But in recent years, it has again attracted a growing interest due to the emergence of new areas such as comparative public policy. Now let us know about what is comparative politics. Broadly, the goal of comparative politics is to encompass the major political similarities and differences between countries. The task is to develop some perspective on the mixture of constants and variability which characterizes the world's governments and the context in which they operate. While the term comparative government is quite old, the term comparative politics, as mentioned above, is relatively new. The change is significant, as are a number of differences between the two, which go much beyond that of nomenclature. The former is described as the traditional approach, while the latter is viewed as the modern approach. In 1955 RC, Macreades clearly differentiated the two when he pointed out that the traditional approach was non-comparative, descriptive, patrocial, static, and monographic. These characteristics require a brief discussion. The traditional approach was non-comparative and descriptive, in that standard textbooks described a number of countries, one after the other, in detail, but attempted little comparison. It was hence monographic in character, that is, we had excellent country studies, but no attempt to understand why particular countries had a multi-party system or why democracy worked better in one country than the another. This was because the traditional approach was much narrower in scope, as it was based on the formal legal approach that characterized political science as a whole. Consequently, as its name implies, it was restricted to the study of the formal processes of governments and institutions. In contrast, comparative politics is wider in scope and encompasses not merely institutions but political processes as well. That is, it covers political parties, pressure groups, and a wide range of informal institutions and processes as well. This enables better analysis of institutions and processes within states and between states. Hence, it can be comparative in a way that the traditional approach could not be. Second, comparative politics, in contrast to the traditional approach, is multidisciplinary in outlook, meaning that it draws not only on political science but also on history, economics, and sociology. Part of this was due to changes in the discipline of political science as a whole, and partly due to the behavioral approach, which, as we shall see, affected comparative politics also. Third, the traditional approach was parochial, that is, restricted to the European governments and therefore Eurocentric in its outlook and analysis. The post war period saw a broadening of the field as after decolonization, the number of states increased, throwing up fresh theoretical and methodological questions. Finally, the traditional approach was static. It did not try to understand why systems change. Comparative politics, in contrast, has been preoccupied with questions of how political systems change from traditional to modernity and the problems that rapid change can produce, and also why some systems change more slowly than others and retain traditional features. In the 1950s and 60s, a number of distinguished scholars such as Harold Laswell and Gabriel Almond took on the task of carving out the establishing the field of comparative politics. Their basic task was to distinguish it from political theory on the one hand and from international relations and area studies on the other. Comparative politics was described as different from political theory as it involved not only theorizing but also classifying, categorizing, and discovering relationship among variables, hypotheses, building, and empirical testing. It was suggested that circular relationship can be visualized between theory and comparative politics. Comparative research begins by taking a fairly established theory, testing it empirically in the field in a number of situations, and then refining the theory again in the light of the findings. Many theoretical tools such as party system, federalism, parliamentary system, etc., were formulated in this manner. Comparative politics had and continues to have boundary problems with international relations. This is because there is common ground between them. The former often studies countries as enclosed within a world capitalist system. Many scholars such as A. Z. Frank and Immanuel Wallstein have developed large-scale approaches such as dependency and underdevelopment using this method. But there are major differences. Comparative politics does not deal with the relationships between countries in depth, concentrating on comparisons of political phenomena within countries, while the former is a central subject in international relations. Area study arose during the Second World War when there was need to have knowledge about the history, culture, economy, and social structure of certain strategic areas important during the war for framing policy. This necessitated an interdisciplinary team consisting of social scientists from different disciplines, which could focus upon an area intensively and provide the required information. Comparative politics also studies areas intensively. A major difference is that while area studies experts can provide a great deal of data which explains immediate events, long term and underlying deeper trends require analytical and theoretical tools which only comparative politics can provide. There, however, remains a contested proposition between the two subject subdisciplines. The shift which took place from comparative government to politics thus can be traced to two changes in the immediate post-war period: developments internal to the discipline of political science, and the second, the broadening of empirical field to include the new states which arose out of decolonization. In the late 1950s, political science was affected by the behavioral revolution, which had already affected anthropology and sociology. This created a desire for greater scientific rigor and a multidisciplinary approach. The behavioral revolution implied that behavior was more important than rules, thus necessitating the systematic collection of large amounts of data about politics in various countries as well as fields. As data without theory would blind, the behavioral evolution implied the explicit elaboration of concepts, models, and hypotheses. The emergence of the Third World further stimulated a whole new approach to the explanation of differences between politics and society in rich and poor countries. The development and modernization theme. It led to the use of two frameworks in comparative politics: the systems approach and structural functional analysis. The notion of the system was taken from the biological and physical sciences, where the human body or any machine was visualized as a system with subsystems, organ or parts which had boundaries but which were closely interrelated and overlapped. Human society was therefore made up of various systems: political system, economic system, etc., each of which performed specialized functions. All societies, it was argued, move from simple to complex. That is, the role performed by individuals within them become more specialized, leading to the emergence of distinct systems with clear-cut boundaries and functions. The more complex, the more developed or modern the system becomes, human societies were visualized as moving towards greater specialization and modernity. The political system was conceptualized as a system in which policies are to be implemented for further development. Complementary to this, the structural functional approach, borrowing from sociology, attempted to create a value free science of politics by describing all systems as having similar basic structure and functions, irrespective of level of development of their political, social, and economic systems, which could be compared and analyzed. All systems attempting in their passage from simple to complex or tradition to modernity to reach a point of equilibrium. The emergence of a number of new states as a result of process of decolonization also encouraged such theorizing. By the use of systems analysis and the structural functional framework, all political systems, it was felt, could be studied irrespective of their differing historical background, level of economic development, culture, and values. The main dilemma was whether the theoretical tools and techniques used to study European governments should be merely extended to the study of the new states or their need for a change. Concepts such as multi-party system, federalism, parliamentary and presidential system were the product of comparative observation of Western government over a long period of time. Would they be useful in studying non-Western governments and processes, or was there, as Lucien Pai claimed, a distinct non-Western political process due to differences in history and culture? In general, the only concession made to differences between the East and West was to allow for some cultural differences in analysis. Apart from this, the concepts of political development and modernization fashioned by scholars such as James Coleman, Gabriel Almond, and Lucien Pai were seen as useful for analyzing and comparing the new states. A similar development is seen on the left as well, with the fashioning of large scale concepts such as underdevelopment and dependency to understand the developing countries and to highlight their differences with the West. Thus, the emphasis was on grand theory or large scale theorizing about political system. These approaches ran into trouble from the very beginning. These were criticized as Eurocentric, reluctantist, and too ambitious. Comparisons on this scale proved very difficult. There was therefore a return to a more normative science that did not ignore cultural differences, which make comparisons difficult, and middle range theorizing, in which comparison is pitched at a lower level. Many scholars were disillusioned by their own efforts. Almond writings in the International Encyclopedia of Social Sciences, argued that comparative politics was a best a movement and not a subdiscipline within political science. By the end of the 1970s, comparative politics reached a plateau. Parts of it were incorporated into political theory and parts into area studies. A more optimistic assessment would be that while the attack on the traditional approach was successful, the new alternatives suggested also were not free from limitations. The reorientation of comparative politics resulted in an expansion of the subdiscipline in terms of theoretical depth and empirical scope as attempts were made to integrate a growing but desperate body of knowledge by means of theory. With this, we want to wind up today's lecture. Thank you so much for your attention.